Thank you so much for tuning in today to chat about online communities, or rather for tuning in to listen to me chat about online communities. My name's Emily Palladino and I'm a Customer Insights Manager for a retailer in Melbourne, Australia. So I guess just a little bit of background. On the surface, it may seem like talking about market research online communities is quite archaic and a little bit redundant. But market research online communities, or MROCs, are continuing to rise in popularity. So I believe it's never actually been a more important time to talk about them. Whilst online qual has been around for a long time, and I will talk to you a little bit more about online qualitative research later on, but I've been working on them for a number of years. In fact, probably a couple of decades ago would have been my first online qualitative research. I would say that market research online communities probably came into the mainstream in about 2009, so roughly about 10 years ago. I guess they were really introduced as an alternative to traditional qual and as an extension of online panels as well. And obviously, for obvious reasons, they would be turned around a lot quicker and a lot cheaper as well. But they've really picked up so much traction since their inception that in 2017, the Grit report indicated that over half, or 59%, of companies researched were already using market research online communities, and that 21% were considering using them in the future, which is just massive. And obviously, even our own Ray Pointer is expecting them to continue to increase in the future, and has estimated that the market research budget within clients will increase from 5% in 2016 to at least 70% in 2026. Now, there's obviously a number of reasons for their popularity, although I'm only going to touch on a few of them today, and I guess they're probably the most important reasons why I started using them and why I continue to use them today. So recruiting and travelling, around the state or the country or even around the world in the name of traditional qualitative research is really quite time consuming, and it's quite a costly exercise as well. So online communities can really provide us with greater reach, quite literally at the touch of a button. And it means, I guess, that, you don't even need to leave your office or your desk or even the couch to be able to continue to conduct that qualitative research, in particular, in an easier and faster way. Now, whilst they're relatively expensive to set up in the beginning, because as you can imagine, you need to organise all of the back-end programming, you need to design the actual community itself, you need to write an engagement plan, you need to recruit the respondents, and all of those other tricky things that we need to do to set them up. Whilst after they've set up and you've got it up and running, they're actually quite easy to run, and they're quite a cost-effective way to conduct research. I know that in my current job, we conduct a lot of qualitative and quantitative research via our community, and I have to say we'd actually be quite lost without it. Now, the reports turned around really, really quickly, and that's really hugely beneficial to us here in my role, purely because more often than not, we need to answer questions really, really quickly. And so we find that we can do that for our internal stakeholders within 24 to 48 hours, obviously dependent on how tricky the research is. So I was going to spend a lot of time talking about the merits of market research online communities, or MROCs, but Then as I sat down on Valentine's Day, no less, to write this paper with a glass of wine in one hand and a melted chocolate in the other hand, I realised that I could talk to you about the merits of MROCs, I always trip up on that, in a more academic way, or I could actually talk about the factors that I think are super important, and that is that importance of really developing a really good relationship with your supplier. Because what I found is that in my experience, you can have the most beautiful community in the world, you can have wonderful back-end technological systems that run really, really well. But if the relationship with the supplier doesn't work, it can all fall apart. So apologies in advance for all of the online dating references. I've already thrown a few of them at you already. But I found that there's a lot of synergies between the two. So the market research, online communities, the suppliers, and obviously online dating. So I thought it would be a really fun way to land the message. And it's a shame that we're not actually conducting this on Valentine's Day. So today, in an attempt to work out the attributes that are important for a good relationship, I'm going to cover off just a few things. So how to meet the one. So how to meet that online supplier when you're busy playing the field. The technological non-negotiables when you're having the talk, and then how to close that deal when it's time to commit. So when you finally know that this is the one, how do you go about doing that? So just a little bit more about me as we kick off. I guess you'd call me an experienced dater who's kissed a lot of frogs. As I alluded to earlier on, I actually conducted my first online group about 20 years ago. I was actually living in London at the time and working for a London agency. The client was living and working in Sweden. The online supplier was living and working in America, and then the respondents were spread all over the UK, from London upwards really, and below, I guess. The whole experience was highly exciting, and I guess that's where I really started to fall in love with the online digital world and how to actually use it to benefit me and my work. But the fact that we had to cross the Atlantic to get some help to help us set it up and even moderate it to a certain extent probably goes some way to explaining the, some of the difficulties and complexities of that particular project. A few years later, I went on to manage my first community in Australia. So I was back in Australia. So this was roughly about 10 years ago. And there just weren't many suppliers who were offering online communities locally. So even though I was living and working in Melbourne, our online supplier was in Sydney. Now, technology had come a long way in 10 years, and so setting up the community was a much, much easier process. But the platform was still pretty clunky, and the fact that our online supplier was living in another city did also cause a few problems occasionally. Now, cut to the present day, and there are just so many suppliers that finding the right one is actually quite a daunting process. And I guess if you combine that with the difficulties of trying to execute change within a company, especially if you work within a large company like I do, I guess it can actually put a few people off. So I can understand why some businesses suffer from technology inertia and, decide it's just a little bit too difficult to wander down that path. But in my role, I actually inherited an online panel, so it wasn't a community at that point. And as I started to develop the relationship with the supplier, or at least try to develop the relationship with the supplier, I learnt pretty quickly about the importance of being able to meet halfway with the supplier and develop the sort of relationship that would enable you to both win and meet your needs. Now, to be honest, I could have dealt with the lack of features, which the supplier also dealt me, but it was really this lack of partnership that got me, and I guess eventually really caused me to lose interest in that whole relationship altogether, unfortunately. So I started to date around, and it wasn't until I started speaking to other suppliers that I realised not only how many of them were on offer, both nationally and internationally, but also just how many factors would need to be taken into consideration just to make sure that I made the right decision, because it is a big investment, a big time investment as well. So you want to make sure that you're getting yourself into the right relationship. Now, being a digital platform, obviously the opportunities are endless in terms of the numbers of suppliers available to you. And I did actually speak with a number of international suppliers, particularly some really good DIY international suppliers who had a beautiful, beautiful platform that we could have worked with, which was, again, beautiful to look at, but really intuitive and easy to use. But it wasn't until I explored and really thought about all of my needs that I thought, maybe trying to deal with someone locally could be a better idea. But I started to write a checklist, just as you would when you're looking for your ultimate partner, and I found a few non-negotiables that I really needed to be met. So the first thing for me was, as shallow as this sounds, it needed to be a beautiful platform. We're in market research, and particularly in digital market research, we're competing with our consumers or customers' screen time. And when you think about it, we're competing with social media as well. So it needs to look beautiful enough for them to want to spend time on the site or on the community. I needed a knowledgeable and reliable team that I could rely on. I needed them to have proven track record of working with suppliers that were in a similar industry to me, because I needed to know that they could actually deal with our requests, deal with our crazy turnaround times, and just understand our language as well. I needed them to be able to set up the community in a timely manner, but also be able to, as I said, respond to our requests in a timely manner as well. I needed to be able to work with a supplier that had a number of researchers on board who not only understood the back end, not only understood the technology of the platform, but who really understand research as well. And I know that sounds ridiculous to say, but you'd be surprised at the number of suppliers there who don't have researchers on their team. But I needed them because if I needed them to pick up the slack for me, write a survey, moderate a group, moderate the discussion forums, and then write a report for me, I needed to be able to rely on them to be able to deliver that as well. I needed a good support team who could respond to my queries and help out if anything were to go wrong. And obviously having someone locally who would be able to do it for me really relatively quickly in a timely manner was super important to me, purely because our requests turn around so quickly. And to have someone sitting on the other side of the world, regardless of how beautiful their platform is, just wasn't going to cut it for me. So I guess if we refer back to our dating references, I really wanted the RSVP of market research online suppliers, because I knew that whilst Tinder can be quite great for a short-term fix, I really needed someone that I could date for a while. Now, experience has shown me over the years that there's a number of technological non-negotiables when setting up a community. And these are just a few that I find to be super important. it was important to me that the community could actually conduct or allow me to conduct qualitative research. As I said at the very start, qualitative research is quite expensive, or it can be quite expensive, and it has quite long lead times as well, obviously dependent on the complexities of the project itself, but it has the propensity to have long lead times, and the reporting can also add quite a few weeks to the whole process as well. So I needed the option to be able to conduct online qualitative if I needed to, when I needed to. I needed to be able to run multiple discussion forums as well, simultaneously, because that would enable me to really segment the members within my community, so that I could run research concurrently with different segments. I needed a community that was easy to use. So by this, I wanted it to be really easy to set up surveys, really easy to script them, really easy to set up discussion forums, really easy to be able to really export that data and run some really quick reports as well, primarily, again, because our turnaround times are just so quick. But it needed to be mobile optimized as well, because I found primarily in the past few years, 5 years probably, that access is primarily via mobile phones or smartphones. So it needed to be mobile optimized. That was a definite non-negotiable. And there were also some other features that it needed to include: quick polls, because they're really good at engaging members, surveys for obvious reasons, discussion forums, online focus groups, as I mentioned, the ability to upload photos. Our members are also members of Instagram, for example, and other social media platforms, and they're used to uploading photos and videos to try and tell their story. So I needed to be able to have a platform that could mimic that as well. Now, gamification was quite important. Again, in my experience, I've heard that it works quite well, not heard, experienced, but it works quite well to encourage participation. I also needed to be able to pay additional incentives, if possible, either by way of a gift card or by extra points, just to reward the more engaging or more engaged participants as well. And lastly, I needed the data security to really be up there. We deal with a lot of customer details and a lot of member details, and I needed to ensure that all of that information was stored on a local server rather than on a third-party server or internationally. Now, whilst it was important to tick a lot of these boxes, and I appreciate I've just named quite a few, the real decision to go with the current supplier that we're with was made when we got to spend a little bit of time together. A little bit like, spending a little bit of time with your date after your first date. Now, what I found was that they took a real interest in me. They took an interest in my plans, my job, my role, and my vision for the community and exactly where it was that I wanted it to go. They really took the time to understand the business that I work in, the constraints that I work in, and the crazy timelines as well. And then as we started up, they were really great at making allowances for me and the business that I work in. They were very, very flexible and worked above and beyond their call of duty to get things done really quickly, but also, conducted a lot of the work that I should have done as well. So really, really helpful in the whole process. So I guess you could say that it was love at first sight, and really we did realise that we were the perfect match when we spent a little bit more time together. Now, I hope that that's gone some way to help you when you find yourself single and ready to mingle and find a new market research online supplier. But I guess the key takeouts from today for me would be that it's really important to play the field, date around and see what's out there. always keeping in mind what it is that you're aiming to accomplish with your market research online community and what your plans are and what your visions are, so that you can lay down those rules, those dating ground rules, so that there isn't any misconception between yourself and your online supplier, and so that you're on the same page from the get-go. And then when you're sure, make sure that you work closely with your legal team and your IT compliance teams just to really lock in that contract, and ensure that you have separate teams on the supplier side so that there isn't any conflict of interest, neither now or later on down the track as well. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope I've helped you in some way, and I hope we get to chat again soon.